Welcome, beautiful souls, and thank you for being here. This story is dedicated to those who have carried darkness within, who have battled their own demons, and who have dared to let love in anyway. To the hearts that have been broken, scarred, and still believe in hope. This is for you. Your willingness to feel the shadows and the light makes this journey possible. The subway was alive with its usual chaos, rumbling tracks, the echo of hurried footsteps, and the faint scent of coffee clinging to damp coats. Stephanie Williams adjusted the strap of her laptop bag and slipped into the last available seat on the downtown train. Her hands were cold, and her mind was already rehearsing the lines of code. She'd been debugging half the night. She loved New York, but some mornings it felt like the city swallowed people whole. Everyone running, nobody looking, until she looked up and saw him. Across from her sat a man, mid-30s, maybe older. Sharp suit, collar slightly unbuttoned. He wasn't scrolling through his phone like everyone else. He was reading a book, a real one, hardcover The Great Gatsby. Stephanie smiled faintly. Of all books. Her fingers tightened around the novel in her own lap. The Catcher in the Rye. Two dreamers sitting in opposite worlds, reading about people who never quite fit in. The train jolted. Their eyes met for a second, just long enough for her heartbeat to stutter. His gaze was steady, blue-gray like the Atlantic before a storm. There was something about him that felt contained, like a man holding back an ocean behind polite silence. He gave a small nod. She smiled almost shyly, before looking back down at her book. But the words had blurred into meaningless shapes. Kenneth hadn't meant to look at her, or notice her laugh, quiet and melodic, when someone's phone blasted music nearby. He'd been really trying to keep his head down, to keep to his routine, work, gym, therapy, silence. The subway was predictable, impersonal, safe. But this woman wasn't part of the script. Her presence was disarming. The soft glow of caramel brown, skin beneath the harsh train lights, curls framing her face like they'd been painted there. When she smiled, it didn't feel forced. It felt like light. And God, he hadn't seen light in a long time. He turned another page of Gatsby, though he wasn't reading anymore. Her reflection flickered on the window glass beside his own. He shouldn't have cared. He couldn't care. The train screeched to a stop. She stood up, gathering her things, and for the briefest moment their eyes met again. And then she was gone. Kenneth closed his book slowly. His thumb lingered on a highlighted line, one he'd underlined years ago. You can't repeat the past. He exhaled through a bitter smile. Can't, he thought. Tell that to my demons. The next morning, Stephanie took the same train, same time, same route, habit, hope, maybe a little of both. The city was grey and heavy with rain. She tucked herself into the same seat, and there he was again, sitting across from her. This time he wasn't reading. He was watching the window, expression unreadable. She hesitated, then spoke before she could overthink it. Rough day already? He looked up, surprised, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. Something like that, he said, voice smooth, low, like gravel softened by water. Yours. Too early to tell, she said, grinning. But I'll let you know by lunch. He chuckled. It was a sound that seemed foreign to him. Like laughter was something he hadn't practiced in a while. When silence returned, it didn't feel awkward. It felt suspended, like the train itself was holding its breath. She glanced at the book in his hand. Gatsby again? Second read, he said. Or maybe just trying to remind myself why I liked it the first time. What about you? He asked, nodding to the worn paperback in her hands. Catcher in the Rye. I keep going back to it when life feels off. Does it help? Not really, she smiled. But it makes me feel like I'm not the only one who doesn't have it all figured out. He studied her for a moment, like he was trying to memorize the way her eyes softened when she spoke. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, That's a rare kind of honesty. Before she could reply, the train slowed. Her stop. As she stood, she fumbled, and something small slipped from her book. A pressed daisy bookmark, fragile and faded. She reached for it, but the train lurched, and it fluttered out of reach, caught beneath a stranger's shoe. By the time she could bend down, the doors had opened, and she had to go. Kenneth looked down. The daisy lay crushed but still intact. A small fragment of someone's heart left behind. He bent, picked it up gently, and slipped it between the pages of Gatsby. She couldn't believe it. That little daisy wasn't just a bookmark. It was the bookmark, the one her mom had given her before she passed. "So you'll always know where your heart belongs," her mother had said. And now it was gone. That evening, she sat in her apartment, laptop open, code glowing across the screen, but her mind was far away. She wasn't thinking about debugging pipelines or server logs. She was thinking about a man on a train with a soft smile and sad eyes. She told herself it was silly. He was a stranger, just a face she'd probably never see again. And yet something in her chest whispered otherwise. 3 days later, the universe answered. "Same train, same time." Kenneth sat there again, reading. Her breath caught when she saw him, and even more when she noticed what was in his hands. "Is that—" He held it out before she could finish. "You dropped this." The pressed daisy, perfectly flattened between wax paper, preserved, safe. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again," he said softly. "Neither was I." For a heartbeat, the world went still. Just them, two strangers suspended in the hum of the city beneath the city. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," he replied, smiling faintly. "You should probably keep a tighter hold on it next time." "Noted," she laughed. "I'll try not to lose my sentimental treasures again." When he smiled back, it reached his eyes, but only for a moment before something shadowed them again, like the light had flickered and almost gone out. That evening, they left the train together for the first time. Rain misted over the city streets, the kind that turned neon reflections into watercolor. They walked side by side, their umbrellas bumping occasionally. He asked, "You always take that route?" "Every day. It's my morning therapy, before I go fix everyone else's tech disasters." He chuckled. "You're in tech?" "DevOps engineer," she said, half proud, half weary. "You?" "Investment. Tech startups mostly." "Ah, so you're the reason people like me never sleep." He grinned. "Guilty?" They stopped at a corner where their paths split. "Well," she said, "this was unexpectedly nice." He hesitated. "Yeah, it was." She offered her hand. "I'm Stephanie." He looked at her hand, then took it. Warm, steady. "Kenneth." "Nice to officially meet you, Kenneth." "Nice to officially meet you, stranger." That night, he sat alone in his penthouse apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering city. On the coffee table lay The Great Gatsby. He poured himself a drink he wouldn't finish, the ice melting faster than he could process his thoughts. "What are you doing, Kenneth?" he thought. "You don't get to feel again, not after her." He looked at the framed photograph on the shelf, Emily's smile frozen in time. 5 years. 5 years since that night. 5 years since he'd chosen work over her dinner plans. 5 years since she'd gotten in the car, angry, distracted, and never made it home. The guilt never faded. The therapist said it wasn't his fault, that grief takes strange forms. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw headlights, rain, sirens, and now, this woman, Stephanie. Something about her reminded him what warmth felt like, and that terrified him more than anything. Stephanie, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about him. The way his eyes softened when he listened. The way his words carried weight, not arrogance, but something quieter, sadder. There was something in him that called to the part of her that always wanted to fix broken things. But she also knew love built on rescue never ends well. Still, when she boarded the train the next morning and saw him again, her heart betrayed her. She sat beside him this time. He looked surprised but didn't pull away. They talked about music, books, how they both used late-night work as a distraction from their thoughts. When she mentioned her mom, his expression softened. "When did you lose her?" he asked gently. 2 years ago, cancer." He nodded, voice quiet. "I'm sorry. I lost someone too." She didn't ask who, not yet, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, that shadow again. The train slowed. Neither moved. Outside, rain streaked the glass, distorting the city lights. Inside, silence wrapped around them, comfortable, fragile, almost sacred. Stephanie looked at him, her reflection overlapping his, and she thought, sometimes the universe doesn't send people to fix you. It sends them to remind you that you're still alive. As the train came to its final stop, Kenneth said almost under his breath, "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow." She smiled. "Maybe you will." Kenneth watched the train pull away. her smile still lingering in his mind like sunlight after rain. The empty seat beside him felt different now, alive somehow, as if a piece of her warmth had stayed behind. And though he didn't know it yet, that fleeting moment, so that quiet exchange between two strangers, was about to change everything. It started with coffee. Kenneth hadn't meant to show up that morning, not really. He'd told himself he was running late for a meeting, that he'd take a different train, that he didn't have time for distractions. But then he found himself on the same subway, same hour, sitting in the same seat across from her again. Stephanie noticed him instantly, and her lips curved into that soft smile that seemed to thaw something frozen inside him. She raised her paper cup of coffee like a toast. He mirrored it without thinking, a quiet acknowledgement between two people who were no longer strangers but not yet anything more. The universe had a funny way of ignoring the walls people built around themselves. By the end of the week, their daily conversations had become something sacred, sometimes light, banter about books or how terrible New York bagels were outside Manhattan, and sometimes quiet, when silence spoke louder than words. She'd tell him about debugging at 3 a.m., about losing her mother, about how she still kept her mom's favorite tea on the kitchen shelf, just to smell it when she missed her. He listened genuinely. He didn't interrupt. He let her fill the spaces he'd spent years keeping empty, and she noticed how often his gaze drifted to the world beyond the window, to places far away even when he was right beside her. One evening, when the train stopped near Midtown, he asked if she'd like to grab dinner. The question came out tentative, almost like he was afraid of it. She said yes before he could change his mind. They went to a small bistro tucked between two skyscrapers, all amber lights and slow jazz. Kenneth watched her talk animatedly about technology, the passion in her eyes a contrast to the calm steadiness he projected. He was careful with his words, his movements, as though he feared saying too much or wanting too much. When she laughed, it startled him. How free it sounded. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been around laughter that didn't hurt. She noticed how his fingers brushed the rim of his glass each time he grew quiet, like a man tracing the outline of something he couldn't let go. After dinner, they walked through the city, the streets glimmering with rain. New York at night felt endless. Alive, dangerous, beautiful. She slipped her hands into her coat pockets and tilted her head toward him. "You always look like you're thinking about something you can't say," she said softly. He glanced at her, then back at the pavement. "Maybe I am." "You don't have to," she whispered. "Not with me." He looked at her like he wanted to believe that. But belief had never been his strong suit. When they reached her building, she turned to him and smiled. "Thanks for dinner." "Thanks for saying yes," he said quietly. "See you on the train?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, hesitating. "You will." When she walked inside, Kenneth stood on the sidewalk a long time, rain dripping from his hair, his reflection fractured in the puddles. He wanted to tell her that her presence terrified him, that every time she smiled, it felt like stepping closer to something he'd sworn to avoid. But the words stayed buried where all his truths lived, underneath guilt, under layers of silence. Days blurred into weeks, and what began on a train became something more. Weekend coffee runs, long talks about everything and nothing. A steady rhythm that felt almost like peace. They were opposites in motion, her vibrant and open, him quiet and guarded. Yet somehow they fit. Kenneth found himself laughing again. Not the polite kind of laugh reserved for colleagues, but the kind that reached his chest. She brought out a softness in him he didn't recognize. He'd watch her talk about work, about her little brother who still called her Steffi, about her dreams of starting a foundation for women in tech someday. She'd listen when he spoke of business, innovation, the strange emptiness that came with success. But he never spoke about Emily, not once. It wasn't that he wanted to hide it. It was that saying her name out loud might break the fragile thing growing between them. Stephanie, intuitive as ever, sensed the invisible barrier but didn't push. She believed people opened up when they were ready. She'd been closed off once too after her father left. Pain taught her patience. Still, there were nights when she lay awake wondering who haunted his silences. The first time Kenneth kissed her, it was on a rooftop overlooking the East River. She'd been rambling about how New York looked like two different worlds, one above ground glittering, and one below, lost in tunnels and noise. He smiled faintly, telling her she sounded like someone who believed in destiny. She said maybe she did. He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him gave way. The kiss wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, searching, like he was trying to remember what tenderness felt like. When he pulled away, his breath trembled against her skin. "I haven't done that in a long time," he whispered. "Was it worth the wait?" she asked, her voice teasing but gentle. He brushed his thumb over her cheek. "More than you know." For a while the city disappeared. There were only the two of them, the hum of distant traffic, the warmth of shared air. But even as they stood together, Kenneth felt the faint tug of darkness reminding him that light never stayed long in his world. That night, after she fell asleep beside him, he lay awake watching the city lights dance across her face. He wanted to freeze that moment, to live in it. But guilt crept in like a shadow at dawn, whispering her name, Emily. He turned away, pressing his palms into his eyes, fighting memories that refused to die. The way Emily had laughed, the way she'd cried that night before she left, the sound of her voice on the phone just before the crash. He had promised himself he'd never feel again. That love was a punishment, not a gift, and yet here he was, falling anyway. A few days later, an email arrived in his private inbox. No subject line, no sender name, just a single message and an image attachment. She deserves to know the truth. His chest tightened as he opened it. The photograph was recent, him and Stephanie leaving a cafe, his arm around her waist. But what made his blood run cold was the second attachment. A screenshot of an old headline, "Tech investor Kenneth Stanford mourns loss of fiancée in accident." Underneath, a caption he'd tried to bury forever. "Fiancée Emily Rhodes killed in late-night crash after heated argument." He stared at the screen, his throat closing. His secrets were rising to the surface, uninvited, unstoppable. He closed his laptop and poured himself a drink. The tremor in his hands wasn't from the cold. He couldn't let Stephanie know. Not yet, she wouldn't understand. He barely understood it himself. He told himself it was better this way, that protecting her from the truth was an act of care, that some darkness didn't deserve the light. But a voice in the back of his mind whispered what he'd always known: lies, even kind ones, rot the soul. When Stephanie arrived at his apartment later that week, she noticed the unease in his movements, the hesitation when he kissed her cheek, the way he smiled without really meaning it. "You're quieter than usual," she said, watching him as he poured 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one and shrugged. "Just work." She studied him for a moment. "You sure?" "Yeah." His smile didn't reach his eyes. She wanted to push, to ask what shadow hovered behind that silence. But she didn't. Instead, she reached for his hand. "You know you don't have to carry everything alone." His gaze flickered to hers. "I'm not used to anyone wanting to share the weight." "Well," she said softly, squeezing his hand, "get used to it." Something in her tone made him want to believe again, even if he didn't deserve to. He turned, the wind sweeping across his face, and for a moment she saw everything: the pain, the longing, the fear, the man beneath the mask. "Stephanie," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "you deserve someone better than me." "Then be him," she whispered. He kissed her again, deep and desperate, as though the world might break if he didn't. For that one moment, the shadows didn't matter. The city, the ghosts, the guilt, all of it vanished. But when they pulled apart, Kenneth knew what was coming. Love had returned to his life, and with it, the reckoning he'd been running from. Outside, the night carried the faint echo of a familiar lyric. "Don't get too close, it's dark inside." And Kenneth understood with aching clarity, that darkness doesn't vanish just because someone loves you. It only waits for the light to flicker. And when it did, everything he'd built with her would be tested. The night fell heavy over Manhattan. Rain lashed against the windows like it was trying to wash the city clean. But Kenneth knew better. Some stains don't fade, they just sink deeper. He hadn't slept in days. The glass of whiskey on his desk sat untouched, his reflection fractured in its amber glow. Emails blinked on his screen, meetings stacked on his calendar, all reminders of a life that looked perfect from the outside. But inside, he was collapsing, quietly, completely. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw her, Stephanie, laughing, her curls catching sunlight, eyes full of belief in him. And every time he heard the crash again, Emily's voice, the rain, the silence that followed, he gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles went white. The guilt never left, it lived in his bones, and now it was eating through what little peace she had given him. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't let her love a lie. Stephanie stood in her apartment that night, staring at her phone. 2 days, no word. He wasn't like this. Kenneth was steady, thoughtful. Even when he was distant, there was still care. But now, nothing. The silence hurt worse than any words could. Still she typed, "Are you okay?" No reply. She pressed her palms to her eyes. She wanted to believe this wasn't about her, that maybe he was just busy. But her heart knew something had changed. When his message finally came hours later, "Can I see you tonight?" Her breath caught. Her fingers shook as she typed back, "Of course." He showed up at her door just past 9. The rain hadn't stopped. His shirt clung to his skin, his hair damp, eyes bloodshot and hollow, like he hadn't been living, just surviving. Stephanie's heart twisted. She stepped aside. "You're soaked. Come it." He didn't move at first, just stood there, staring at her like he was trying to memorize her face. Finally, he stepped in, but the warmth of her apartment didn't reach him. "Do you want tea?" she asked softly. "No." His voice was rough, breaking at the edges. "I need to tell you something. I want to hide the truth. I want to shelter you, but with the beast inside, there's nowhere we can hide." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" He took a shaky breath. "Before I met you, there was someone else." Her name was Emily. Stephanie froze. "Emily?" He nodded. "We were engaged. 5 years ago." She swallowed hard. "You never mentioned her." "I couldn't." His throat worked as he tried to find words. "She died." The word "died" hung in the air, sharp, heavy. "I'm sorry," Stephanie whispered. He gave a broken laugh. "Don't be. It wasn't an accident." Her eyes lifted to his, searching, confused. "What do you mean?" His hands trembled. "We fought that night. I said things I shouldn't have." She got in her car, angry, crying. It was raining. She never made it home. Stephanie's breath caught. "Kenneth." "I killed her," he said, voice cracking open. "Not with my hands, but with my words. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her tires screeching. I see the headlights. I hear the silence that followed." Tears burned in his eyes. But he didn't wipe them away. "I thought I could bury it. That if I worked harder, made more money, built something, maybe it would erase it. But it didn't. It just made me colder. Then I met you." He looked up, his face raw, broken. "You were the first thing that made me feel again. But that's the problem, Stephanie. You deserve someone whole. Not a man who still wakes up in the middle of the night seeing ghosts." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd see what's underneath," he said. "The guilt. The anger. The man who couldn't save her." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't care about your past, Kenneth. I care about you." He stepped back, shaking his head. "You shouldn't." She moved closer. "Don't do that!" "Don't shut me out because you're scared." "I'm not scared," he snapped, voice suddenly rising. "I'm dangerous to love." The words cut through her like glass. "Don't say that," she whispered. "It's the truth," he said, his voice breaking. "I destroy people. Emily loved me and she died. You love me, and I'm killing you slowly with every lie I tell." Her breath hitched. "You're not killing me. You're hurting me because you're running away. I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" she cried, her voice shaking. "From your own heart?" The silence after that was suffocating. Rain hammered the windows, the only sound between them. He finally whispered, "I can't be what you need." Stephanie's lips trembled. "All I needed was honesty." He turned away, covering his face. His shoulders shook, not from anger this time, but from the weight of breaking down completely. She reached out, her fingers barely brushing his arm. "Kenneth!" He pulled away, voice raw. "Please don't." That's when she realized she couldn't save him. No one could until he wanted to save himself. The air between them felt fragile, like one wrong breath could shatter it. She whispered, "Don't go. Please just stay and talk to me." He looked at her then, eyes wet. jaw trembling, and it broke her heart how much pain one man could hold. "I can't," he said hoarsely. "Not like this. I'll only hurt you more." Her voice cracked. "You already are." He hesitated at the door, his hand on the knob, his shoulders shaking. "If I stay," he whispered, "I'll destroy the one person who still believes there's something good left in me." Tears streamed down her face. "Then let me be the one who proves you wrong." For a moment, he almost turned back, almost. But the fear, the guilt won again. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "You deserve more than my ghosts." And then he opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The rain outside grew louder, almost merciless, and somewhere beneath the storm, he could hear the faint echo of demons playing from a car passing by. "Don't get too close, it's dark inside. It's where my demons hide." He pressed his palms to his ears, but it didn't stop. The sound wasn't outside, it was inside him. Every word, every regret, every memory. He had left the one good thing in his life and walked away, not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't know how to believe he was worthy of her love. Stephanie stood under the rain without an umbrella, the city blurring around her. Her chest hurt in ways she couldn't explain. She'd seen pain before, disappointment, heartbreak. But this was different. It wasn't about losing him. It was about losing hope. By the time she reached her apartment, her clothes were drenched, her hair plastered to her skin. She sank to the floor, back against the door, tears mixing with rain. She whispered into the quiet, "I would have stayed, even in the dark." But he wasn't there to hear it. That night, he poured himself another drink and sat by the window, the city a blur beneath him. The ghosts were louder now. Emily's laughter, her last words, the crash, the silence afterward, all crashing like thunder in his mind. He played the same song on repeat. "When the days are cold, and the cards all fold." The lyrics felt too close, too real. He stared into the darkness outside, the reflection of his own face superimposed against the storm. He hated that reflection. He hated the man he'd become. He hadn't moved in hours. Her words haunted him. "They're just the parts of us begging to be seen." He thought about calling her, about apologizing, about begging her to come. But all he did was stare at the phone, silent, cold, lifeless. He didn't know how to fix this. He only knew one thing. He'd finally told the truth, and in doing so, lost the only person who made him feel alive. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the guilt and the ache, a single thought lingered. Maybe this was what he deserved. The first snow of the year fell quietly over Manhattan. The streets glistened under pale morning light, each flake a whisper of peace in a city that never stopped moving. But Kenneth had stopped long ago. 3 months had passed since the night he walked out of Stephanie's apartment. 3 months of silence, of echoes, of learning what it meant to sit alone with his demons instead of running from them. Therapy sessions, empty mornings, letters written but never sent. He was trying, slowly, clumsily, to forgive himself. Some nights he still heard the song, "Don't get too close. It's dark inside." But now he listened differently. Not as a warning, as a truth, one he was learning to face. Stephanie, meanwhile, had poured herself into work. The long hours, the endless lines of code, logic made sense when emotions didn't. But healing? Healing wasn't logical. It came in waves. Sometimes she hated him. Sometimes she missed him so much her chest ached. And sometimes she understood. She had seen his pain, the kind that doesn't go away because someone says, "I love you." Still, she wished he'd fought harder for her, because she would have stayed, even in the dark. That morning, the subway platform was quieter than usual. The city hadn't fully woken up yet. Just a handful of commuters, a cup of coffee in every hand, and the hum of steel beneath their feet. Stephanie stood near the doors, her scarf wrapped tight, eyes half lost in the rhythm of the rails. It had been months since she'd thought of that train, the one where they first met, where fate had played its quiet trick. But memories have a way of finding you when you least expect them. The train screeched to a stop. She stepped in, her usual seat by the window. And when she looked up, her heart stuttered. Kenneth was there. Same suit, same posture, but different eyes, softer, quieter, carrying a humility that hadn't been there before. For a second, they just stared at each other, the world slowing around them like it had that first day. He looked uncertain, almost afraid to breathe. Then slowly he offered a small, trembling smile. "Hello, stranger." Her breath caught. 2 words, and the dam inside her cracked. She looked down at her hands, gripping her coffee. "You still take this train?" "Every morning," he said quietly. "Hoping one day you'd be on it again." She glanced up. His voice wasn't rehearsed, it was raw, unguarded. The man she'd loved was still in there. But now there was something new, a softness, a peace. The silence between them was fragile. Finally, she said, "You look different." He gave a faint laugh. "Therapy helps. And time, I'm not fixed. But I'm learning to live with the cracks." She nodded. "That's good." He looked down, his fingers fidgeting with something in his coat pocket. "I kept this," he said, holding it out. The daisy bookmark. Edges a little worn now, but still beautiful. Still hers. "I thought I lost it," she whispered. "I tried to return it once," he said softly. "But I think I was never meant to give it back. Not until I learned why it mattered." Her eyes lifted to his. "And why does it matter now?" He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Because I finally understand what it means to hold something fragile and not break it." The words hit her like a wave. The train clattered through the tunnel, a heartbeat in the silence. He took a breath, voice low. "Stephanie, I can't undo what I did. To Emily. To you. But I can tell you this. I've spent months learning to forgive myself, and somewhere along the way I realized I never stopped loving you." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "Kenneth!" "I don't expect anything," he continued quickly. "Not forgiveness, not love. I just needed you to know. Because if there's one thing you taught me, it's that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. Even when you're terrified." She stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling, emotions crashing and blending, anger, ache, longing, tenderness. Then quietly she asked, "Why didn't you call?" He exhaled, his voice breaking. "Because I didn't want to reach for you out of guilt. I wanted to reach for you when I knew I could hold you right." Her lips trembled. "And can you?" He nodded barely. "I don't know, but I'm willing to try. Every single day." The honesty in his tone, the vulnerability, it stripped away every wall she'd built. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. The train slowed, the same stop where they'd first met. She looked at the door, then back at him, and something in her softened, not because the pain disappeared, but because love, real love, isn't about never hurting. It's about choosing to stay, even after you've both been broken. When the doors opened, neither moved. He whispered, "Can I walk you to work?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yeah, I'd like that." They stepped out together, the world buzzing around them, people rushing, phones ringing, taxis honking, but for once, the city didn't feel heavy. The snow fell gently now, dusting her curls, his shoulders. He looked over, eyes soft. "You still believe in fate?" She smiled faintly. "I believe in second chances." He exhaled a shaky breath. "So do I." They walked in silence for a while, side by side. No hand-holding, no grand gestures, just 2 people daring to exist in the same world again, learning that sometimes forgiveness doesn't roar, it whispers. At the corner light, she turned to him. "You know I never stopped listening to that song." He smiled, a quiet. "Knowing one? Me neither." She met his eyes. "It used to sound like a warning. And now?" She brushed a tear from her cheek. "Now it sounds like healing." The light turned green. They crossed together, the world around them moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, so did they. The train that started it all had led them back, not to what they were, but to who they'd become. 2 souls no longer running from the dark, but learning to live with it. And as they disappeared into the snow, the faint echo of the song lingered somewhere between them. "Don't get too close. It's dark inside. It's where my demons hide." Only now for both of them, the darkness didn't mean the end. It meant they'd finally found the light. We all have demons, and that's okay. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest, vulnerable, and human. This story is a reminder that even in the darkest places, hope can find a way, and love can heal what was once broken. Carry that with you, and never stop believing in the light after the storm. Vintage Mike Tales,